"Move it, cleaning lady!" Sergeant Thompson barked as Sarah Rodriguez pushed her cart through Fort Carson security checkpoint. The contractor badge hanging from her neck read "Clean Force" in faded letters. Thompson and his partner snickered. Another minimum-wage civilian with a mop bucket probably couldn't even spell military. But Sarah's hands that had disarmed over 200 IEDs in Afghanistan, hands that had defused car bombs while under sniper fire, hands that had saved entire platoons from certain death, those hands gripped the cart handle with deadly calm. Then the alarm screamed. Red lights flashed. "Bomb threat! All personnel evacuate now!" The PA system crackled with panic. Thompson's face went white. The EOD team was 3 hours away. The device was active. Sarah slowly reached into her cleaning cart and pulled out something that made Thompson's blood freeze. An EOD qualification badge, worn smooth from 8 years of combat operations. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "I need you to clear this building." Sarah Echo Rodriguez had been invisible for exactly 18 months, 2 weeks and 3 days. That's how long she'd been pushing cleaning carts through military facilities across Colorado, mopping floors where she'd once walked in combat boots, emptying trash bins in offices where officers made decisions about bombs she could defuse in her sleep. At 32, Sarah moved with the controlled precision of someone who'd learned that one wrong step could vaporize a city block. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a regulation-tight bun, secured with the same black elastic she'd used during 8 years of active duty. Her blue Clean Force coveralls were always pressed, always clean, always anonymous. The coveralls hid everything that mattered. They hid the thin white scar that ran along her left forearm, courtesy of shrapnel from a Taliban IED that had detonated 30 seconds too early in Kandahar province. They hid the slight callus on her right index finger from thousands of hours handling detonation timers and pressure plates. And most importantly, they hid the small bronze EOD badge she kept pinned inside her chest pocket, where her heart used to be. Sarah had enlisted in the Army straight out of college in 2012, 3 months after graduating with a degree in electrical engineering. She'd wanted to serve her country, and the recruiter had painted a picture of adventure and purpose that made her father, a Vietnam veteran himself, beam with pride. "EOD," the recruiter had said, sliding a pamphlet across his polished desk. "Explosive Ordnance Disposal. We need people with steady hands and brilliant minds. You interested in saving lives by making sure the bombs never go off?" The training had been hell. 8 months at Eglin Air Force Base, learning to identify, approach, and neutralize every explosive device known to modern warfare. Sarah had been one of only 3 women in her class of 42. She'd graduated second in her class and earned the call sign Echo for her ability to hear the electronic signatures of different detonation systems. But it was in Afghanistan where Sarah truly learned what EOD meant. 3 tours between 2013 and 2020, each one more dangerous than the last. She'd crawled through rubble to reach devices that intelligence said were impossible to defuse. She'd talked panicked soldiers through emergency procedures while enemy fire whistled overhead. She'd saved the lives of people whose names she'd never learned in villages she couldn't pronounce for reasons that seemed more complicated with each passing year. If you believe our veterans deserve recognition regardless of their current circumstances, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss these stories of hidden heroism. The incident that ended Sarah's career happened on a Tuesday morning in Helmand Province, during what was supposed to be her final mission before rotating home. An IED had been planted in a school that was supposed to be evacuated. Intelligence was wrong. There were still children inside. Sarah had disobeyed direct orders to wait for backup. She'd entered the building alone and disarmed the device with 43 Afghan children watching from the hallway. The bomb would have killed them all. Instead, she'd carried a sleeping baby out of the building while the device safely dissolved into component parts behind her. The Army had court-martialed her for disobeying orders. The media had called her a hero. The politicians had called her a loose cannon. Sarah had called it Tuesday. But heroes don't get disability benefits when their trauma doesn't show up on X-rays. Heroes don't get job interviews when their security clearance gets revoked over a disciplinary action. Heroes don't get respect when they're pushing mop buckets through the same buildings where they once saved lives. Clean Force Military Services paid $50 an hour plus basic benefits. Sarah worked 47 hours a week across 3 different bases, cleaning offices and bathrooms and maintenance shops for soldiers who looked right through her. She lived in a studio apartment 40 minutes from Fort Carson, drove a 2009 Honda Civic with 180,000 miles, and tried not to think about the Bronze Star gathering dust in a box under her bed. Sergeant Mike Thompson had been stationed at Fort Carson for exactly 6 months, which made him an expert on everything, according to Sergeant Mike Thompson. At 26, he'd never deployed overseas, never seen combat, and never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with attitude and volume. His partner, Corporal Jake Williams, was 23 and fresh out of MP school. He looked up to Thompson the way puppies look up to their masters, copying his swagger and adopting his opinions as if they were gospel truth. This particular Tuesday morning found them manning the main security checkpoint, processing the stream of contractors, civilians, and lower-ranking soldiers who needed access to the restricted areas of the base. Thompson took particular pleasure in making the process as difficult as possible for anyone he deemed unworthy of his respect. "Papers!" Thompson demanded when Sarah approached the checkpoint at 6:47 a.m., just like she had every Tuesday for the past 6 months. He'd never bothered to learn her name, despite the fact that she'd been cleared through his checkpoint dozens of times. Sarah handed over her contractor badge and building access forms without speaking. She'd learned months ago that engaging with Thompson only made the process longer and more unpleasant. "Clean Force," Thompson said, reading her badge like it was something distasteful. "Where are you headed today, cleaning lady?" "Maintenance Sector 7, Sarah replied quietly. Same as always. Thompson made a show of examining her paperwork, even though he could have recited her clearance level from memory. Williams snickered at his partner's performance, enjoying the way the civilian woman shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "You know," Thompson said, handing back her badge with deliberate slowness, "I've always wondered what kind of person ends up pushing mop buckets for the military. I mean, there's got to be a story there, right? Failed out of basic training? Couldn't handle the pressure of real military life?" Sarah took her badge and paperwork without responding. She'd heard variations of this conversation before, from Thompson and others like him. They saw her coveralls and assumed they knew everything about her worth as a human being. "I bet she applied to join up but couldn't pass the physical," Williams added, warming to the theme. "Or maybe the mental requirements were too tough. Not everyone's cut out for military service after all." Sarah pushed her cart past their booth, heading toward the maintenance sector. Behind her, she could hear Thompson and Williams laughing about something, probably her. She'd stopped caring what people thought about her 18 months ago, around the same time she'd stopped sleeping through the night. The maintenance sector was a sprawling complex of workshops, storage buildings, and equipment bays where Fort Carson's mechanics kept the base's vehicles and machinery in working order. Sarah's Tuesday route took her through 7 different buildings, cleaning offices, break rooms, and bathrooms for soldiers who barely acknowledged her existence. She'd been working for about 2 hours when the first alarm started. At 9:23 a.m., every speaker on Fort Carson began broadcasting the same message in the calm, measured tone that military personnel use to announce the end of the world. "Attention, all personnel. Suspicious package located in Building 7C. Explosive Ordnance Disposal team has been notified. All non-essential personnel evacuate the maintenance sector immediately. This is not a drill." Sarah was in the middle of mopping the floor of the motor pool office when the announcement cut through the usual morning noise of engines and power tools. Around her, soldiers began moving with the organized urgency of people who'd trained for this exact scenario. Building 7C was exactly where she was standing. Through the office window, Sarah could see soldiers streaming out of the surrounding buildings, some jogging, others moving with the controlled haste that indicated serious concern, but not yet panic. In the distance, she could hear the wail of sirens as emergency vehicles converged on the maintenance sector. A young lieutenant burst into the office, saw Sarah standing there with her mop, and stopped short. "Ma'am, you need to evacuate immediately. There's been a bomb threat in this building." Sarah nodded and started toward the exit, pushing her cart ahead of her. But as she moved, her mind was already shifting into the analytical mode that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. The announcement had said, "suspicious package," not "confirmed explosive device." That suggested they'd found something that looked dangerous, but hadn't yet determined what it actually was. Outside, the evacuation was proceeding with military efficiency. Soldiers formed up in designated assembly areas, while officers took head counts and checked their personnel against duty rosters. Sarah could see the base commander's vehicle arriving, followed by what looked like half the senior staff of Fort Carson. And that's when she saw them, Thompson and Williams, manning a perimeter checkpoint and directing evacuees away from the danger zone. Thompson was in his element, barking orders at everyone within earshot and generally making himself seem important. "Keep moving, people!" Thompson shouted. "Nothing to see here! Let the professionals handle this!" Sarah was walking past his checkpoint when Thompson spotted her. His face lit up with the malicious glee of someone who'd found a new target for his authority. "Hold up there, cleaning lady," Thompson called out. "Where do you think you're going?" Sarah stopped and turned to face him. "Following evacuation procedures, Sergeant. Same as everyone else." "Not so fast," Thompson said, stepping closer. "I need to verify that you didn't see anything suspicious while you were in there. Could be important intelligence." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The same man who'd spent months treating her like she was too stupid to understand basic military procedure was now asking for her help with intelligence gathering. "I didn't see anything unusual," Sarah said. "Just normal maintenance operations." Thompson nodded as if he'd expected as much. "Figured you probably wouldn't notice anything important anyway. Takes training to recognize threats, and civilians like you don't have that kind of background." Williams chuckled at his partner's wisdom. "Good thing we've got real EOD specialists coming to handle this. This isn't a job for amateurs." That's when the second announcement came over the PA system, and the tone was noticeably more urgent. "Attention all personnel. Confirmed explosive device in Building 7C. EOD team ETA is 3 hours. Repeat, EOD team will not arrive for 3 hours. All personnel maintain safe distance of 500 meters. Thompson's face went white. 3 hours was an eternity when dealing with an active bomb. In 3 hours, anything could happen. The device could be on a timer. It could be unstable. It could decide to detonate because someone looked at it wrong. 3 hours? Williams said, his voice cracking slightly. "Why so long?" Sarah knew why. The nearest EOD team was probably at Peterson Air Force Base, dealing with their own training schedule or emergency call-out. Military EOD specialists were in high demand and short supply, spread thin across installations that covered thousands of square miles. But she didn't say anything. She just stood there listening to Thompson and Williams discuss the situation with the kind of nervous energy that comes from realizing you're in over your head. "We need to expand the perimeter," Thompson said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "Get everyone back another 100 meters at least." That's when Sarah made her decision. She reached into her cleaning cart, passed the bottles of industrial cleaner and packages of toilet paper, and pulled out a small leather folder that she'd carried with her every day for 18 months. Inside the folder was her EOD qualification badge, along with copies of her service record and training certifications. "Sergeant Thompson," Sarah said quietly, "I need to see that device." Thompson looked at Sarah like she'd just announced her intention to fly to the moon using nothing but positive thinking and determination. "Excuse me," he said. "What did you just say?" Sarah held up her EOD badge, letting the morning sunlight catch the bronze surface that had been polished smooth by 8 years of handling. "I said I need to see the device. I'm a certified EOD specialist with 8 years of field experience, including 3 combat deployments." The change in Thompson's expression was immediate and dramatic. The cocky confidence evaporated, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, then something that might have been the beginning of respect. "That's impossible," Williams said, staring at the badge like it might be some kind of elaborate fake. "You're just a cleaning lady." "I'm a veteran," Sarah corrected. "And right now, I'm the only qualified EOD specialist within 3 hours of an active explosive device." Thompson took the badge from Sarah's hand and examined it carefully. He'd seen enough military credentials to recognize the real thing, and this was definitely real. The metal was worn in exactly the right places, the engraving was crisp and authentic, and the serial numbers matched the format used by the Army. "This is your badge?" Thompson asked, though he already knew the answer. "Earned it in 2013, Sarah said. "Renewed my certification every year until 2021. I've disarmed everything from roadside IEDs to car bombs to suicide vests. I know explosive devices the way you know how to check IDs." A small crowd was starting to gather around them. Other soldiers had noticed the conversation and were drawn by the unusual sight of the cleaning lady showing military credentials to the security guards who'd been hassling her for months. "Ma'am," Thompson said, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, his voice carried actual respect. "If you're really qualified, we need your help. The base commander is over there losing his mind about waiting 3 hours for EOD support." Sarah looked toward Building 7C, calculating distances and blast radii in her head. If the device was large enough to require a 500-meter evacuation zone, it was large enough to cause serious damage to the surrounding buildings. If it was on a timer, every minute they waited increased the risk of detonation. "I'll need my kit," Sarah said. "It's in my car." Thompson and Williams exchanged glances. "Your kit?" Williams asked. "Tools," Sarah explained. "X-ray equipment, wire cutters, multimeter, disruptor charges. I never stopped carrying them, just in case." She'd never admitted that to anyone before, not even to herself, but it was true. Every morning for 18 months, Sarah had loaded her EOD kit into the trunk of her Honda Civic before driving to whatever base Clean Force had assigned her to clean. She told herself it was just habit, muscle memory from 8 years of military service. But really, she'd known this day would come. Somewhere, somehow, there would be a bomb that needed disarming and no one else around to do it. She'd prepared for this moment every single day, even while telling herself she was just a cleaning lady now. "Take me to your commander," Sarah said. "And somebody needs to get me access to that building. We're wasting time." Colonel David Harrison had been commanding Fort Carson for 2 years. Long enough to know that Tuesday mornings weren't supposed to involve explosive devices and evacuation procedures. He was standing in the base's Emergency Operations Center, surrounded by staff officers and emergency coordinators, trying to figure out how to handle a confirmed bomb with no EOD support for 3 hours. "Sir," his aide announced, "there's a contractor here who claims to be a qualified EOD specialist." Harrison looked up from the tactical map where he'd been calculating blast radii and evacuation zones. "A contractor?" "Yes, sir. Clean Force employee. Says she's got 8 years of EOD experience and wants to examine the device." Harrison's first instinct was skepticism. Military contractors came in all varieties, from highly qualified specialists to people who'd barely passed high school. The idea that a cleaning service employee was qualified to handle explosive ordnance seemed unlikely at best. "Send her in," Harrison said, "but I want her credentials verified before she gets anywhere near that building." Thompson escorted Sarah into the operations center, where she was immediately surrounded by officers who looked like they weren't sure whether to be hopeful or suspicious. Sarah handed over her EOD badge and service records, then stood at attention while Harrison examined them. "Rodriguez," Harrison said, reading her service jacket. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Rodriguez, 704th EOD Company." Sarah's spine stiffened. She hadn't heard her rank and unit designation spoken aloud in 18 months. It sounded strange, like hearing her name called in a foreign language. "Yes, sir," she said. "Discharged in 2021. Harrison was reading through her service record, and his expression was changing as he absorbed the details. 3 combat deployments, over 200 successful ordnance disposals, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal with Valor device. "Says here you were court-martialed for disobeying orders," Harrison noted. "Yes, sir." I entered a building to disarm an IED when ordered to wait for backup. The building contained 43 Afghan children. Harrison looked up from the file and met Sarah's eyes. Did you successfully disarm the device? Yes, sir. And the children? All safe, sir. Harrison closed the file and handed it back to Sarah. In 30 years of military service, he'd learned to recognize competence when he saw it. This woman had the bearing, the record, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd done this job under the worst possible conditions. Sergeant Rodriguez, Harrison said, are you willing to examine this device? Yes, sir. But I'll need access to the building and my equipment. Done. Harrison turned to his aide. Get her whatever she needs. And I want a security team to accompany her, but they follow her lead on anything related to the device. Sarah nodded and headed for the exit, but Harrison's voice stopped her. Rodriguez, he said, why are you working for a cleaning service? Sarah turned back to face him. For 18 months, she'd been preparing for someone to ask that question, but she'd never come up with a good answer. Because someone has to clean the buildings, sir, she said finally. And I needed a job. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Harrison nodded as if he understood something that couldn't be explained in words. Carry on, Sergeant, he said. And Rodriguez? Thank you. Sarah's EOD kit was exactly where she'd left it, carefully organized in a foam-lined case in the trunk of her Honda. She'd maintained the equipment religiously, checking batteries and calibrating instruments even though she'd had no reason to believe she'd ever use them again. Now, surrounded by Fort Carson's emergency response team, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. It was a feeling she'd missed more than she'd realized. The suspicious package had been found in the motor pool's main bay, tucked behind a workbench where it might have gone unnoticed for hours or days. Initial visual inspection suggested a sophisticated device, possibly involving both timer and remote detonation capabilities. Sarah approached the building wearing full protective gear, but she knew that if this thing was designed to kill people, no amount of armor would help. EOD work was about skill and knowledge, not protection. You either disarmed the bomb correctly or you didn't walk away. Through her headset, she could hear the voices of the emergency response team, the base commander, and various other officials who wanted to know what she was seeing. But Sarah had learned long ago to tune out everything except the device in front of her. It was beautiful, in the way that well-engineered death usually was. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating this bomb, using components that suggested both technical sophistication and access to military-grade explosives. This wasn't the work of an amateur. Sarah began her examination with X-ray photography, building a three-dimensional image of the device's internal structure: timer mechanism, pressure plate, backup detonator, enough plastic explosive to level half the building. Whoever had built this knew exactly what they were doing. What's your assessment? Harrison's voice crackled through her earpiece. Complex device, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Multiple initiation systems, professional construction. This was built by someone with extensive training. Can you disarm it? Sarah studied the X-ray images, tracing the path of wires and identifying the sequence of connections that would need to be severed. It was like solving a puzzle where the wrong answer meant instant death. Yes, sir, she said. But I need everyone to clear back to 1,000 meters. If something goes wrong, the current evacuation zone won't be sufficient. She heard Harrison relaying orders over the radio, expanding the perimeter and moving personnel to safety. Sarah appreciated his confidence in her assessment, even though they'd met only 20 minutes ago. Working with steady hands and absolute focus, Sarah began the delicate process of rendering the device safe. First, the timer mechanism, carefully isolated to prevent accidental triggering. Then the pressure plate, slowly lifted and secured. Finally, the backup detonator, the most dangerous component because it was designed to activate if someone tampered with the primary systems. It took 47 minutes. When Sarah finally stood up and keyed her radio, her voice was calm and professional. Device rendered safe, she announced. Building is secure. The cheers that erupted over the radio network were loud enough to hurt her ears. The story of Sarah Rodriguez spread through Fort Carson faster than a prairie fire. By evening, everyone on the base had heard some version of the tale. The cleaning lady who turned out to be a decorated EOD specialist, the security guards who'd been mocking a war hero, the bomb that only she could disarm. Thompson and Williams had spent the afternoon in what their sergeant major diplomatically called professional development training, though everyone knew it was really a comprehensive lesson in treating people with respect, regardless of their current job title. Colonel Harrison had offered Sarah a position as a civilian EOD instructor at Fort Carson, with a salary that would allow her to quit Clean Force and move into base housing. She'd accepted, though she insisted on finishing out her cleaning contracts first. "A commitment is a commitment," she'd told him. The local newspaper ran a story about Sarah's heroism, focusing on her military service and the injustice of a decorated veteran working minimum wage jobs. The Army Times picked up the story, then CNN, then Fox News. Suddenly, Sarah Rodriguez was the face of veteran employment issues and military justice reform. She tried to avoid the attention, but it was impossible. Politicians wanted to meet her. Veterans organizations wanted her to speak at their events. Hollywood agents wanted to buy the rights to her story. Sarah declined most of the offers. She'd learned that heroism was usually just ordinary people doing their jobs under extraordinary circumstances. She'd done her job on Tuesday morning, the same way she'd done it for 8 years in the Army and 18 months as a cleaning lady. But there was one change she embraced wholeheartedly: the respect. Walking through Fort Carson now, soldiers nodded when they saw her coming. Officers stopped to shake her hand. The young enlisted troops looked at her the way Thompson and Williams should have looked at her from the beginning. Sarah kept her EOD badge pinned to the inside of her jacket, right over her heart. But now she knew that heroes don't become invisible just because they're not wearing uniforms. They just wait patiently for the moment when the world needs them to be visible again. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that moment comes with enough time to save everyone. 3 months later, Thompson approached Sarah in the base commissary. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure if she'd even speak to him after months of treating her like dirt. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted to apologize for everything. I was wrong about you." Sarah looked at the young sergeant, remembering her own early days in the military when she'd thought rank and uniform were the only measures of a person's worth. "Thompson," she said, "you weren't wrong about me. You were wrong about what makes someone valuable. I'm the same person I was when I was pushing that cleaning cart. The only thing that changed was your perception." Thompson nodded, understanding more than she'd expected. "Yes, ma'am. I'll remember that." Sarah believed he would. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that cost you your pride. As she walked away, Sarah could hear the familiar sounds of Fort Carson continuing around her. Engines starting, soldiers calling cadence, the distant pop of small arms fire from the training ranges. It was the sound of people preparing for missions they hoped they'd never have to complete, training for scenarios they prayed would never arise. But Sarah knew better. Somewhere, someone would need those skills. Someone would need that training. Someone would need heroes who looked like ordinary people until the moment they revealed themselves to be extraordinary. And when that moment came, she'd be ready. She'd always been ready. The quiet heroes walk among us every day, wearing coveralls instead of uniforms, carrying mops instead of medals. But heroism isn't defined by what you wear or where you work. It's defined by what you do when everything is on the line and someone needs saving. Subscribe to Tales of Dignity if you believe that honor serves in silence, and that sometimes the most qualified person in the room isn't wearing the uniform you expect.